Welcome back. In this lesson, we're continuing with YelpCamp, and in particular, we're going to focus on the user model that we just created and the comment model and associating the two, so that when you create a new comment, it's automatically associated with the current user, with your user ID and your username. So I'll show you what I mean. Before I do that, I'll highlight that I'm in V8 now, so a new version. We will be making pretty substantial changes to some of the models and to the database, so it warrants a new version. So V8, if you want to follow along, and I'm going to run the server to start. And then I'm going to go to /campgrounds, and first I'll sign up with a new account, and this account will be potato, and password will be password again. Sign up. Now let's take a look at Desert Mesa and go to add a new comment. And we get this form. And our goal is to have this author field go away so that we can automatically know the author's name and save that to the new comment without the user having to manually specify it. So we'll just have the comment be potato, 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 and the author is potato. All right, submit, and we see this. And we want to see this. It should look exactly the same, except the user shouldn't have to actually enter that username manually. To do that, the first thing we need to do is on the comment model, we need to add some fields in where we can store the user's ID and the user's name. So let's stop the server and we'll open up the comment model. So that's models/comment.js. And inside of here, under author, it's no longer just going to be a string, it's actually going to be an object. And an author will have two things, an ID and then also a username. What we could actually do is store the entire author in there. So it looks like this. When we have a new user, remember the user account looks like username, potato, and then it has _ID, some ID, but there's also the hash, which is that crazy long string, and then the salt. And we don't want to store all of that data inside of each comment. Rather than doing that, we'll just take the important pieces, which are the ID of the user that created the comment and the username of that user. We could just store the ID and then use that ID to look up the correct author and then grab the username from there. But because we'll be printing out the username pretty often, that's the whole point of this, is that we loop through and we print out each comment's text, but also the author. It wouldn't be very efficient if we had to look up the correct author every time by taking an author ID, and then finding that author, and then finding its username. So instead, we're just going to store the data right here inside the comment, which is something that we could only do with a non-relational database like Mongo. So ID is going to be another object. It has a type, which is mongoose.schema.types.object.id, which is just like we've done before. If we take a look at the campground, where we have comments, where type is mongoose schema types object ID, and then we need a ref. And ref refers to the model that we're going to refer to with this object ID, which is a user. And then username will just be a string. And we need to make sure we have our comma in here and save, and we should be good to go. Before we move on any further, I'm actually going to stop the seeds in my database. So I'm going to open the seeds file, and I'm going to comment out quite a bit of code for now. So we will remove all, but then I'm not going to create campgrounds. We'll do it manually to start. So let's make sure we comment out the right code. So we have cdb and campground.remove. Everything else we'll get rid of. Just comment it out. Because comments will now have a user ID and an author name or a username, and our code in here doesn't account for that. So basically I just want a blank slate to start from, so I'm not going to see the database, but I will run it, and what this will do is remove everything from our database, and I'll just do that one time right now. And if I restart, and I go back here, I have to start the server again, we should see there are no campgrounds. There we go. Okay, so now I will uncomment everything and save, and then I'll go back to my app.js and just remove the line where we're calling seed. So I'll add a comment here, seed the database, and for now, and I'll actually do that on the same line, seed the database, and for now, we're going to comment that out. We're not going to seed the database. We'll manually go in and add a new comment to a new post and create users. Okay, so now that we have that out of the way, let's focus on this logic of associating the author and the ID and username of that author with the comment. So we need to go to the code where we're creating the comment, which is inside of routes and inside of comments.js. And it's right here, comments create. And this code is responsible for first finding the correct campground by using that ID in the route. And then once we find that campground, then creating a comment, and then pushing that comment into the campground, and then saving the campground. What we'll do is before we actually push the comment into the campground, into the comments array, we're going to add username and ID to comment, and then we'll save comment. So it's actually pretty easy. Now that we have our data structure set up, all we need to do is figure out how we get the current user's username and the current user's ID. And fortunately, we've seen that before. It's request.user. And we can count on there being a request.user because if we get to this code, the only way we get here is if a user is logged in. And that's because we have this isLoggedIn middleware where if there isn't a user, we redirect back to /login. So this ensures that someone is logged in. So why don't we just do a simple console.log, and we want request.user.username to start. And let's do it like this. New comment username will be, and just print that out, request.user.username. And let's start the server up. And we will have to go in and add a new post into our database. The first thing I'll do is log in as potato with my password, which is password. And then that takes me to /campgrounds. Now let's add a new campground. And I have a Creative Commons image that I'm just going to use here, but feel free to use any image, of course. And then I'll add a name. Let's just call it Crazy, Insane, Beautiful Mountains. And then for the description, I have some lorem ipsum that I'll paste in, just some placeholder text. Let's click on submit, make a new campground. Now let's go to more info and try and add a comment. We can see I'm signed in as potato. Let's add a new comment, fill out some text here. I'll just do more lorem ipsum, just some of that there. Great. And then I'll leave the author blank just to show you that we can still get potato even if I don't type it here. Then we click submit. Now let's look at what was console.logged. So I will need to scroll up right here. New comments username will be potato. Great. So that's request.user.username. And there's also request.user._ID. And I won't go through console.logging that again, but you'll just have to trust me, it's there. We've seen it in previous videos. Request.user contains those two pieces of information, ID and username. So before we go any further, let's go and remove this field, this author field, from the form. So that's inside of the comments new. So rather than stopping my server, I'll just use my mouse to find it. So that's views, comments, new. And we'll just get rid of this entire thing right here. So we no longer have author. Now it's just text. And then we'll fill out the text and hit submit. And that will then send our data here. We'll create a new comment. Now let's use request.user.username and .id to actually associate the user with the comment. So to add the username and ID to the comment, let's start with the ID. We just write comment.author.id equals request.user._ID. And comment.author.id is because of the way our model is set up. So a comment has an author, and an author has an ID and a username. So let's go back now. Comment.author.id is request.user.id, and comment.author.username equals request.user.username. Just like that. And we'll save. And then what we also have to do, get rid of this line, is actually save the comment. So comment.save. And then we'll push it into the comments on the campground, and then we'll save the whole campground, and then we'll redirect. And why don't we, before we do that, let's just do a console.log comment so you can see what it looks like at the end there before we redirect. Okay, restart the server now. Let's go back. We'll have to refresh the page. We will have to log in again. So potato, password is password. Log in. Let's go and add a new comment. And the comment here will just be blah, blah, blah. Submit. All right, let's take a look at what was console.logged. So it's hard to see because we have some other console.logs, but it's right here. So we have text, which is blah, blah, blah. We have the comment ID itself, and then we have author, which has an ID and a username potato. Great. Now the last thing we want to do is actually display the username here. What we're doing now is displaying the entire user because all that we had was comment.author, and this is on the show template. So let's open up the show template for campground, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Down here, we're printing comment.author, and that's referring to this entire thing that has an ID and a username. We want comment.author.username. So that's an easy fix. .username here, and save. Now let's stop the server, restart it, and then we go back and can refresh the page, and you'll see that we have potato here. This first one we didn't create correctly, where we didn't actually have the code set up yet, so it has an empty author username, but this one is working just fine. Let's add one more under a different account, and I'll call this one tomato, and the password is also password. Sign up. Let's go add a comment, and this one will just be ha ha ha. Submit, and there we go. Automatically says the username tomato. We didn't have to have the user enter that manually. As always, I'll end this video with a quick recap of everything we did. We started by going to the comment model and adding in an author field. We already had author, that was a string, but adding in author as an object that has two properties, ID and username. And ID is a reference to a user model ID, and username is just the string name of the current user. So we set that up, and then we needed to go into our comments routes, and it was pretty simple. When a comment's created, we use request.user.id and request.user.username and just plug those right in to comment.author. And then we save the comment, and that's all we had to do. And the very last thing was making sure we displayed comment.author.username, not just comment.author. Awesome. So this is really starting to come together. If you take a look at how far we've come, we still have a ways to go with some of the styling. We have a little bit more logic to do, but we've really covered a lot so far with YelpCamp.